Thank you to PUCL, to Chandrasekhar and PUCL Kerala, Kavita, Suresh, Arvind for asking me. PUCL is, I think, one of our most important bodies. It shows what the citizenry can do. And we are not very good as a people at forming institutions that last and at forming institutions that are not captured by a family or by an individual. We are not very good at founding institutions that have long-term credibility, that stand on the edifice of democracy. PUCL is one of them, one of the very few that we have. We should all be very proud of it. I certainly am. And I think it has a very big role in what is happening before us and what is to come. I've made some prepared remarks. Before that, I was just thinking a little bit about what was said by Suresh on the Constitution and secularism. And that was not part of what I had written, so I thought I could just begin by that. So till 2008, Nepal was a Hindu Rashtra per its constitution. It was a Hindu Rashtra in two ways. The first way was that executive authority came from a Kshatriya king, the Kshatriya dynasty's kings who were born, they claim Kshatriya ancestry, so power would come from them, whether it was legislative power or whether it was executive power, as has been prescribed by the Smritis. The second way in which it was a Hindu Rashtra, this is the only other way in which it was a Hindu Rashtra, is that in the court of this Kshatriya king, there was a Brahmin called the Mool Purohit who would guide or advise the king on how to rule. These are the only two ways by which Nepal defined itself as being a Hindu Rashtra. There was nothing else from the Smritis. I come from the Patidar community. We are Shudra by caste. So in Smriti terms, we would be denied the right to education. We don't wear the Janeu, obviously, and so on. Nepal did not adopt any of those practices because it could not. We are not living in the first millennia. We are living in 2024. Even in 2008, it would not have been possible for Nepal to have done what the Smriti texts tell such a kingdom, such a Hindu Rashtra to do. My point is that there is no end state that the BJP or the RSS have when it comes to a Hindu Rashtra. We don't even have a hereditary king that we can hand it over to and make this place the sort of kingdom that Nepal had been. Who will be the person in the court who will guide such a king, even if we had such a king? We don't have anybody. The exclusion or removal of words from the preamble will not mean that we will not continue doing what it is that those who wrote the Constitution wanted us to do, which is be a secular republic. That is the only way in which a modern state can function. There is no other way. Pakistan tried another way, and we can maybe discuss that in the Q&A if we have time. I'll begin my prepared remarks. And to do so, I think to understand where we are in 2024, we should survey the problem, even if the problem is familiar to us. And I think that it will be familiar to most of us here in this gathering. That we have a ruling party that believes thrives through and is motivated by a very fierce nationalism that is inward focused. So usually nationalism tends to be outward focused. If you look at German nationalism in the 30s, it was about the conquest of Western Europe. It was about expanding the country towards the east. It was about the fact that more land was needed for a growing population. Most of the Second World War, the German armies spent outside of Germany. So it's only in 1944, 1945, when the war ends, that the German army returns to Germany. All the years from 1939 onwards were spent in France, was inwards at Indian citizens, particularly Indian minorities, especially Indian Muslims. This Hindutva nationalism is expressed in three ways. The first is through exclusion, and by that I mean a political exclusion, that we have, India has 200 million Muslims, likely more because we haven't done a census since 2000. MP from the ruling party, whether in the Lok Sabha or in the Rajya Sabha, this is about 400 MPs in all. There was none in the last Lok Sabha either. There is one Muslim BJP person was last year in Tripura. When Jinnah accused the Congress, rightly, of being a Hindu party, at that point in time, before 1947, the Congress had 3% of its membership as Muslim in our 28 states for the first time. And that has happened because we have denied democracy to Kashmir, which is the only part of South Asia, I should point out, that is not governed under a democracy at the moment. In Pakistan, Bangladesh, Lanka, everywhere else, Nepal, you've got democratically elected government except in Kashmir. There's no Muslim in CM in 28 states. In 15 states in India, there is no Muslim minister at all. And this also goes back to the dominance of the BJP. The print, which is Shekhar Gupta's Morgan Online, had done a survey. In 10 states, there is one Muslim minister normally given the minority affairs portfolio. So it's like something, it's like a scrap that you throw. The question is, what is the purpose of this exclusion of Muslims? What does the BJP, what does the RSS hope to achieve by it? The answer comes to us through a speech that the Janasangh leader, he was the leader of the party that became the BJP. He died in a train accident in the 60s. He made a speech in Pune in 1965 where he says, and I'm quoting him now, "Our quarrel is with the way Muslims behave, coupling political ambition with religious zeal. This is why this war is not religious, but political. There is only one way to defeat Muslim bigotry, and it is to politically defeat them. That is the real solution of the Muslim problem. So long as they are not politically defeated, the rot will continue to grow. Only such a defeat will make them have second thoughts, and the process of Hindu-Muslim cooperation will begin. There need not be any doubt as to whether this political problem should be solved or not. It will have to be solved, and there is only one way in which it can be solved. It can't be solved unless and until Muslims are politically defeated," end quote. So this appears to have been achieved by the BJP under Modi, that we have defeated successfully Muslims. They have no participation in government. But after that, what? That we don't know. That Deen Dayal Upadhyay did not tell us what would come next. The second expression of the three of this inward-facing nationalism is persecution through law and policy. So since 2014, we've seen a series of actions from the BJP, whether through the union government and its laws or through the BJP in the states and its laws. Beef lynching as a category of violence, I had not heard about in my decades as a journalist till 2015. So it begins after the Prime Minister makes speeches against what he calls the Pink Revolution, and then two states that are then controlled by the BJP, they still are, Maharashtra first and Haryana. They pass laws that criminalize the possession of beef. This has nothing to do with the constitution and the protection of cattle. It has to do with the physical possession of beef, the meat. And burden of proof is reversed, and I'll come to that later. But once these laws were passed and they became this raised the awareness of beef as a national issue, the violence began, and it has continued. I think many of us might feel that we don't see that sort of story in the media anymore. One reason is that in newspapers, particularly, once something becomes commonplace, it goes away from the front pages, it goes to page 2, page 3, soon it goes to page 14, 15. very often it doesn't become news at all. But the violence continues. I've documented it in one of my books. The reversal of burden of proof is interesting because it has made the judiciary quite demented in some ways. So there was Gujarat in 2019, the punishment for cattle slaughter was made life imprisonment. Now, remember that cattle slaughter is supposed to be an economic crime. It is not a religious crime. The ostensible reason why we have these laws is that we are trying to protect cattle because the country is short of milk, which it's not because we are a net exporter. But this is what the Constituent Assembly debate said, that we are trying, that this law is there not because of the sentiments of Hindus, but because of the fact that we need milk. A man in Gujarat, Muslim man obviously, was accused of serving beef at his daughter's wedding. This is 2019. The police could not prove that this was the case. The judge sentenced the man to 10 years, saying the police can't prove it. It's your duty to show that that meat that had been consumed or not consumed was not beef. The man could not do so, and he got 10 years. The interesting thing is that the judge was actually following the law. That's what the law says. It's not for, if I'm caught with a smoking gun in my hand and there's a body next to me, it's for the police to show that I committed murder. If I'm accused of having beef in my fridge or in my van, it is for me to prove to the state that this meat was not beef. In 2019, we saw the CAA law, which for the first time, in the opinion of many, including me, believe that there's a violation of Articles 14 and 15 through the exclusion of Muslims in the CAA. That law has since been implemented. What has not happened is that the promised NRC, it has been put on hold in Assam, where it was a fiasco for the reason that the BJP assumed that most of the 19 lakh people who had been left out of the list would be Muslims. They were not. Muslims, because they are minorities and they are threatened, will likely have paperwork in better order than those who are not threatened and don't know what the dangers are of the things that the BJP is doing. That's possibly one reason why there were much fewer of them, still about 3 or 4 lakh, than the BJP thought there would be. And once that happened, the BJP dropped the idea of the NRC in Assam, having created such a gigantic mess. It tends to run away from the problems because the party hasn't thought through what it is doing, and never has and continues not to do so. After 2018, in 7 states in India, marriages between Hindus and Muslims have become criminalized. So if I as a Hindu want to marry a Muslim, we have to fill out a form in these 7 states, including the state that I am in right now, Karnataka. And the district collector or the magistrate will decide whether the marriage will happen. The state retains power in places like Madhya Pradesh to undo marriages, including marriages that have children. The other interesting thing about these laws is that the testimony of an adult woman that she changed her religion of free volition is not sufficient evidence for the state. It is for the man she's marrying and the family she's marrying into that need to prove to the government that she was not coerced. And all of these laws, of course, obviously also come with criminal punishment. Muslims are the only part of the population for whom divorce is a criminal wrong. For the rest of us, it's a civil wrong. The Supreme Court said in 2017 that triple talaq offered in one sitting was invalid, which meant that if it were offered, it would not result in divorce. After that, in 2019, Parliament criminalized the utterance of those 3 words by Muslim men. The situation is this, that if I, as a non-Muslim man, were to be accused of saying the words talaq, talaq, talaq to my wife in one sitting, we would not be divorced, it would not be a crime. If a Muslim man were to be accused of saying the same 3 words to his wife, they would not be divorced, but it would be a crime. We have criminalized the utterance of words and a non-act. Normally, crimes or potential crimes are punished. Here, a non-act, something that hasn't happened, the divorce has not happened, that is being punished. In 2019 again, and I'm going through the dates because it's important to know that these are all recent things, that these are not things that have been inherited by India. These are not natural things. These are things that are being imposed on us, regularly speaking, by this government that has come to power in 2014. Gujarat tightened the Disturbed Areas Act, which is an old law. But what it says, what it means now is that in all of Gujarat's cities, Hindus and Muslims cannot rent and buy property from one another with the permission of the government. So if a Hindu and a Muslim want to rent or buy property between one another, they have to fill out an affidavit that reveals their religion. The collector or the district magistrate will approve of it, and the government will be mindful of what the law says is improper clustering. That is the phrase that is used in the law. In effect, what it means is that foreigners can buy and rent property in Gujarat's cities where Gujarati Muslims cannot. The law, of course, tends to be challenged sometimes, not with a great deal of spirit by the principal opposition party, which is the Congress. And the Supreme Court or the other constitutional courts either choose not to hear it, not to hear these laws, or to perhaps take in the petitions and not go through with what they really ought to be doing. I refer to Kashmir as being the only part of South Asia not under, by the way, Assam yesterday passed a similar law like the Gujarat law, and for 3 months, till the end of polling, presumably, in the state of Assam, Hindus and Muslims cannot rent and buy from one another. This was passed yesterday. There are sort of other things that we reserve for Muslims. This weapon for crowd control that's used in Kashmir, which is called the pellet gun, which is actually a 12-gauge shotgun. It fires bird shot out of unrifled barrels. Beyond the point, beyond 20-30 meters, the shot scatters, and it can't be controlled because there is no rifling. It has blinded 1,000 people, including infants who were nowhere near the scene of a protest. I'm told that that weapon was used most recently in Punjab during the farmers' protest, but that would be the first time it would be used outside of Kashmir. So this deliberate passing of law and policy. The first bit I spoke about was exclusion in terms of politics. This second bit is about law and policy. It has produced an atmosphere, in my opinion. I'm not a social scientist, but I think that it has produced an opinion where it has become acceptable to discriminate against and to tolerate and to condone violence against Muslims. Which is the technical definition of what hate speech is intended to do. It is supposed to go after the community and its rights. And we can see that in many ways. I think the BJP has given up one of the fundamental principles of modern government, which was described as the monopoly over the use of force. That the modern state is described as one where only the government, only the state has the right to use force, which is why murder or rape, physical violence, is a crime against the state. It doesn't matter whether the victim wants to press charges or not. The police will file the FIR and prosecute, because the person who perpetrates the violence has committed a crime not just against his or her victim, but also against the state. Under the BJP, I think that the state is letting go of some of this monopoly over violence. And by that I mean that if, say, the government in the National Capital Region assigns public space to migrant Muslims for prayer because they don't have a mosque of their own, a mob can come and veto the government, which a mob did. And the government had to withdraw its policy because it was afraid of the violence. So that would be an instance of the state giving up its a monopoly. And part of this also has resulted in things like the blaming of Muslims for the spreading of COVID, for the Delhi pogrom in which they were apparently also the perpetrators, but also the primary victims. And because this mindset, in my opinion, has been made acceptable, it will continue to spread. I think Suresh said that no matter where 2024 goes, this is not something that we can just assume will wither away in time. It has permeated into society, into media, and it will remain there till it is actively fought back against. The third way in which the BJP expresses, the BJP's inward-facing nationalism expresses its hatred is by celebrating Muslim persecution. That Amit Shah's office, he personally will approve of the release of convicts who have raped and murdered because of the fact that their victims were the Muslim. That's the only reason why these people were let out of jail. That a union minister will call convicts who have been sentenced for lynching a person because the victim is a Muslim. We have sufficient instances of members of parliament who abuse Muslims openly and are rewarded and given ministries. The world has looked away. I think that for many decades, the world, there was some sense of an external interest in what India was doing to itself. And the world would take notice when things like Pokhran would happen, or the Delhi pogrom of 1984 happened against the Sikhs, or Gujarat happened. Modi was on a list of one. The USCIRF, which is a body, a bipartisan body in the US, which looks at the persecution of minorities globally, it put Modi on a list where he could not travel to the US. This was after 2002. So the world had taken interest in the country in some sense, but I think that because of the rise of China in the last 20 years, and the thought that India might be some kind of counter or some kind of pivot in the Western strategy against China, and the fact that India is thought of as being a potentially lucrative market space for Western products and services. That's one reason why we think, people who work on this, we think that there is less focus on India while such egregious things should have happened. So these are the three elements to go from the bottom. One is the celebration of the persecution, the laws and policies, and then the exclusion. The second element of the BJP's inward-facing nationalism, I think, has not received as much attention as the first, and it is the party's hostility to federalism. And I think it is a posit that we should speak of this at this point in time in this week when the Chief Minister of Delhi is in jail. I wanted to tell you where it comes from. So what follows is a quotation from an article by M.S. Golwalkar, which was published in the Organizer just after the reports on the state's reorganization committee was formed in 1956. The article is reproduced in his book, Bunch of Thoughts, Part 3, Chapter 18, and it is headlined, Wanted a Unitary State. Golwalkar writes, and I'm quoting him, then came our present constitution, converting our country into a number of almost distinct units with a state of its own and all federated into one union. When one pauses to think of the conditions in which makers of this constitution lived when they framed this constitution, one sees that the atmosphere then was extremely congenial to the formation and the evolution of a unitary state. One country, one legislature, one executive center running the administration through the country. But mind and reason of the leaders were conditioned by the obsession of federation of states, where each linguistic group enjoyed a wide autonomy as one people with its own separate language and culture. So this is how he puts the problem, that you could have had a unitary state with only one legislature and only one leader. But you chose not to. And his solution to this, the subhead of this is, there is a remedy. He says, quote, towards this end, the most important and effective step will be to bury deep for good all talk of a federal structure in our country's constitution, to sweep away the existence of all autonomous or semi-autonomous states within one state, that is Bharat, and proclaim one country, one state, one legislature, one executive, with no trace of fragmentational, regional, sectarian, linguistic, or any other type of pride being given a scope for playing havoc with our integrated harmony. Let the Constitution be re-examined and redrafted so as to establish this unitary form of government, end quote. So he wants Article 1 of the Constitution to be abolished, which is that India shall be a federation of states, and for it to be a single legislature, single executive. No Tamil Nadu, no Kerala, no Gujarat, no Madhya Pradesh. Only one state, Bharat, one legislature in Delhi, and one leader. The second source that I want to quote from on this subject is Deen Dayal Upadhyay, again, the man we heard before. So Article 3 of the BJP's constitution, the BJP's party constitution, says that integral humanism shall be the basic philosophy of the party. And integral humanism is a name given to a set of 4 lectures that Upadhyay gave in Bombay between April 22 and April 24, 1965. Neither bunch of thoughts, which is Goldwalkar's main work and perhaps only work, if we were to believe them that we or our nation would define it, is not his work, and integral humanism are not written, they are not books. They are a series of talks, a series of interviews in the case of Goldwalkar. There is no written text that the BJP has, but these 4 lectures are what the BJP says in its own constitution are the basic philosophy of the party. So the quote is from the 3rd lecture. The headline is, Constitution cannot be arbitrary. And the quote is the Constitution too not subject to some principles of a more fundamental nature? We have a written Constitution, but even this written Constitution cannot go contrary to the traditions of this country. Inasmuch as it does go contrary to our traditions, it is not fulfilling dharma. That Constitution which sustains the nation is in tune with dharma. There is no recognition of the idea of Bharat Mata, our sacred motherland, as enshrined in the hearts of the people. According to the first para of the Constitution, quote, India, that is Bharat, will be a federation of states, unquote. That is Bihar Mata, Banga Mata, Punjab Mata, Kannada Mata, Tamil Mata, are all put together to make Bharat Mata. This is ridiculous. We have thought of the provinces as limbs of Bharat Mata and not as individual mothers. Therefore, our constitution should be unitary instead of federal, close quote. This particular aspect of the BJP's ideology has manifested itself in some ways after 2014, and I'll just go through some of them. One is the use of union agencies to intrude into law and order, which is ostensibly a state subject. I don't know how many people know this, but after GST, the right of Indian states to tax has gone. Kerala can no longer raise taxes on its own, except on a very limited board, which includes alcohol and fuel. And the dependence on the union for revenue or for resource has become total, which did not used to be the case earlier. Including now, by the way, for those states that were or were close to being net revenue generators and might have run a surplus. Now that doesn't count anymore, because the union will determine how much money is sent to the state. And it has nothing to do with the state's own capacity, the state's own ability, or the state's own success. The call for one nation, one election also comes from a similar heeding of the BJP's thrust on federalism not being a good thing. And the union's attacks, as we've seen in the case of Kejriwal, Sisodia is also in jail and has been in jail for a long time. And the leaderships in Bengal, Jharkhand, the Jharkhand CM is in jail. Karnataka, Telangana, this week, the Telangana former chief minister's daughter, who is, I think, an MLC, was sent to jail. Under PMLA, by the way, once again, so you've got a reversal of burden of proof. If the prosecution opposes bail, the person pretty much stays in jail. So just like Umar Khalid or the people from the Bhima Koregaon 16, many of whom have spent 3, 4, 5, 6 years in jail, it is possible and perhaps likely that people like Sisodia, Kejriwal will spend that length of time in jail without conviction. This is just trial and pre-trial, merely because the Supreme Court chooses to go along on bail issues with what the executive wants. This is not tenable in a democracy. We are building up to a point where we will have some kind of a conflict. But there is a second problem here when it comes to federalism, that the women's reservation bill was passed last year, and it is to be made operative after census and a delimitation. For 5 decades after 1971, when that was the last time when the number of seats in the Lok Sabha was changed, India ignored delimitation as an exercise. And the reason is that 50 years ago, in 1971, the 85 MPs from UP, Uttarakhand was part of UP then, represented 10 lakh citizens each, on an average. But so did Kerala's 20 MPs. They also represented, on an average, about 10 lakh citizens each. And Tamil Nadu's 40 MPs, and Karnataka's 28 MPs, and Rajasthan's 25 MPs. All of across the country, while the larger states like UP had more seats, 85 seats, Kerala only had 20, but the number of people each MP represented was pretty much the same. That has changed in 50 years. Today, 50 years on, Kerala's population has increased by 56%, but Rajasthan's by 166%. Tamil Nadu's by 75%, but Haryana's by 157%. So what used to be one person or 10 lakh people, one MP ratio no longer applies. It is, of course, the case that the southern states should not be punished for either effective implementation or the population's own consciousness of what fertility rates ought to be. And I think the latter is likely more true than government interventions. But it is also a fact today that the northern MP today represents many more people, many more Indians than the southern MP. And that cannot be looked away from either. Today, Bihar's 40 and UP's 80 MPs represent on an average 30 lakh Indians, whereas the average Kerala MP represents 17 lakh, and the average Tamil MP 19 lakh. This will need to be addressed in a way that the southern states are not punished or don't see themselves as being punished. But of course, the BJP's power center is the north, so it will do what benefits the party. One possible solution, to my mind, the only possible solution is greater autonomy. That you remove from the union those powers which will mean that the southern states don't feel discriminated against on things such as taxation, but that's already been removed from them. So where does the solution then lie? And these are states that are the size of nations. UP is bigger than Bangladesh, Tamil Nadu is bigger than France. Gujarat, which is not that big, is bigger than Britain. Pakistani Punjab is the size of Mexico. But they have, the states on our side of the border don't have any power to tax. They don't have any autonomy, they don't have any agency. The question is, what can be done to resist these two thrusts of the BJP? One on the side of its persecution and exclusion of minorities. The second on the side of its hostility towards federalism. Internal mechanisms in India of opposing authoritarianism have never worked well. I think Jayaprakash Narayan was an exception, but what he could have done in an age of CBI and ED, we don't know. Power was available to the union, but there seems to be some element of restraint that was there earlier of not looking on the opposition as being the enemy, which I think seems to have gone now. So what can stop, what can put pause to what the BJP is doing and seeks to achieve further? I think the political opposition tries, but it's not easy, to be fair to them, to resist majoritarian politics. When you do divisive politics and you polarize people, the pole on which there are more people will normally win. Which is why the BJP continuously has to think it should polarize. If it became suddenly inclusive and would have maybe a fifth of its ministers as Muslims, it could no longer polarize. It would no longer be beneficial to the party in the sense of the electorate. And which would necessarily be something they would not do. The parliament has become more of a building than a sort of institution. I don't think there are people in India that take parliament, the institution, seriously. It doesn't have the capacity to be able to push back against an authoritarian executive like parliaments elsewhere can, I think. Maybe in the UK they can. Here it can't. The judiciary sometimes stands up for liberty, not often. And certainly not very often when the union has a stake in the case. I think when the union has a stake in the case, the judiciary tends to vanish. The bureaucracy, the police and the diplomatic corps show almost no spine, including when their own people are persecuted. A lot of very brave officers in Gujarat, Rahul Sharma, Satish Verma, who stood up for citizens, for individuals, for minorities during the pogrom in 2002, were persecuted. They were hounded out of office, some of them sent to jail. And the rest of the police force, the IPS, was not able to do anything, or chose not to do anything. So despite recognizing that these are the problems, of course, we must and continue to utilize the space that is available to us, whether that space is political, judicial, or legislative, institutional. And this is important because in many ways, I think civil society is the critical element in offering a new direction to the suicidal one which we have chosen after 2014. And while civil society in India is small, it is vibrant. I think that it has been oppressed quite a lot, but it remains defiant. It is also the only part of our society, I think, that is ideologically invested in opposing authoritarianism and communalism, much more than the opposition is. And it is also willing to pay a price for it, though, to be fair to the opposition, they are also paying a very severe price for going up or being a threat to the BJP, as we can see in the instances of the Congress bank accounts or what has happened to Kejriwal and Soren. The two major civil rights victories of our time, or the two biggest ones, have both come from civil society. They haven't come from judiciary, or they haven't come from the political opposition. The pulling back of the farm laws and the pushing back, the scrapping, I should say, of the NRC. It happened because of mass protest and the capacity to mobilize at a level which even Gandhi would not have seen. I don't think Gandhi's satyagrahas involved either sustained numbers of the sort that the farmers' protest had, or as large a volume of numbers across the country as the Shine Bagh movement had. The
one of the things which separate these two is that they seem to, in some sense, have become bigger than merely community-based protests. That in our part of the world, there is a word in the preamble which they haven't gone after yet, which is fraternity, bandhuta. And that word to me means that if my fellow person, my fellow human being, my fellow Indian is being persecuted, or I should stand up for them even when I don't have any stake in that issue. Even when, if I'm not a farmer or if I'm not a Muslim, I should be invested in opposing CAA and the farm laws. We don't seem to have the ability to build very large movements which are outside the framework of one community. The Punjab, Haryana farmers, in the case of the farmers movement, and the Muslim community, especially Muslim women, when it came to CAA. I think because of these successes and the threat it sees to it, that's the reason why the BJP is extremely hostile to civil society and the NGOs. That it's willing to damage India in the process of trying to shut down the civil society as a whole, which it won't be able to, because civil society operates on a different motive, which is not based on profit. And to see why, in the US, 10% of all private sector jobs are in the NGO sector. That in 25 states out of the 50 states that the US has, NGOs account for more jobs than manufacturing. So this is a sector that is not only productive, but it is part of the wider economy and helps with jobs, with the building of state, with the building of state capacity. The 1.2 crore jobs in all in the US that are part of the NGO sector, here we are trying to finish it off. And very briefly, for those of you who don't know, that the NGO sector operates under laws which are different from the rest of the private sector. So if the Ambanis raise money from abroad, they are not told how to spend it or where to spend it. The NGO sector, not only that, the NGO sector can only receive and use money out of one bank account, one branch of one bank in Delhi. It doesn't matter whether you're in Kochi or in Surat. You have to go to Delhi, open a State Bank of India account in that one specific branch and operate your money from there. The rest of the corporate sector is not. 80% of the money that the NGO raises abroad, this is the NGO's money, it cannot spend on what the government calls administrative expenses, which includes all salaries, all travel, all rent, all legal, and so on. The rest of the private sector is not told that you can't spend your money in this way. And it has worked that that the state has shut down quite the operations of quite a few NGOs. And it has meant also that civil society has been kept busy trying to protect itself, or trying to look at or trying to respond to whatever is in the current week the latest problem, whether it is the jailing of Kejriwal or some new law. In many ways, there was more freedom for civil society to mobilize before 1947 than there is today. So if you look at the mobilizations which made the Congress popular on the issue of MSP on indigo in Champaran, or on the issue of corporate monopoly over salt in Dandi, or over high taxation in Bardoli or Kheda, there was the space for people from Bombay, lawyers from Bombay, to go to Gujarat, to go to Bihar and mobilize. It's not there anymore. Given this reality, and I don't think it will change, and the possibility and the likelihood is that it will continue, we must plan for a road ahead after 2024. And this should take into account our strengths, it should take into account our weaknesses, and we do have weaknesses, and our capacity. We must consider also the problem as a whole. I think that because I began with what a Hindu Rashtra was, and the limitations of what it could and could not achieve and sought to achieve. We need to offer something bigger in terms of a vision than what is on the table. And I think that India has developed a reflexive hatred for Pakistan, and this has affected our thinking in many ways that are damaging to us. The BJP, of course, it celebrates this sort of hatred against Pakistan because it's able to bring it together with the Indian Muslim and then be able to blame this side. But it's not just the BJP. It has existed before that. Till 2020, we have 14 half faced China. More than twice that faced Pakistan. And before Galwan, of the army's 38 divisions, 12 faced China, 25 divisions were deployed against Pakistan. And this is because India didn't think through the fact that the strategic threat came from China and not from Pakistan. It was just this reflexive hatred of the events of 47 and what has come after that that has addled the mind, so to speak. Why we shifted, after Galwan, why we shifted certain divisions, 16 now face China, was not actually explained. Because that would actually mean having to think about it and tell the people that, oh, Pakistan is not really the enemy, China might be one. The government doesn't want to do that. We are accustomed to seeing Pakistan as being our enemy. I think it's natural for us. That's one reason why the World Bank, these are World Bank figures, says that intra-regional trade between Pakistan and India it is 20% more expensive for Indian companies to export to a South Asian country, to Pakistan or Bangladesh, than it is for India to export to Brazil, which is halfway across the world. And the reason the World Bank says that it's cheaper to trade with Brazil is that there is a broad trust deficit throughout the region. But why does it exist? Why do we mistrust Bangladesh when it comes to trade? Why do we mistrust Pakistan when it comes to trade? South Asia is the least integrated part of the world when it comes to trade and movement. And the World Bank believes, and these are conservative thinkers who look at prosperity rather than on culture and ideology, that it is our stupidity that is holding us back from being able to trade and have free movement with our neighbors. We should remember that nations do not prosper alone, that regions do, that East Asia, Western Europe, North America, but not South Asia, because we choose to remain closed to one another. But this is not an argument that's made in politics. I think it's an argument that we will have to craft in civil society. Why are we punishing ourselves, both in terms of our federalism, because it's linked, and in terms of our economy, because we believe that our neighbor is the enemy. So just to give you some numbers again, intra-regional trade is 68% in Europe, 60% in East Asia, and 5% in South Asia. So Pakistan doesn't have any capacity to manufacture automobiles. It makes no cars. But it's almost impossible for Mahindra to sell there, or Tata, or Bajaj, or TVS, because we don't want to sell to them. What that has meant is that India has fallen behind in terms of what it could do. So in 1990, a year before the reforms, or the so-called reforms came, India was slightly ahead of China in per capita GDP. So we were at $367 US, nominal US dollars, they were at 317. After 30 years of liberalization, they are 5 times bigger than us, almost 6 times. So the economic system, because these 3 decades came in what we call liberalization, is not the limiting factor. There's something else happening which is stopping us from replicating the high growth rates that the rest of East Asia saw. In 2022, Modi said that we had entered a 25-year phase, which he called Amrit Kal. He said that the journey of the next 25 years will result in India becoming a developed nation. So the question is whether it can become a developed nation. The answer to that is no, it will not become a developed nation. And I'm not saying this as somebody who can forecast the future. I'm just saying this as somebody who's looked at the last 60 years and what the record has been. So the developed nation, there is no single definition of developed nation, but the US is at $70,000 per capita. The UK is just under 50,000, Singapore is at 70,000, Japan at 40,000, Korea at 35,000. Let us say that these are exceptional and we can't do this, so maybe we should aim a little lower. So let's say it's $25,000. Can we get to $25,000 by 2047? To answer whether we can or not, we have to ask where we are today. Today we are behind Bangladesh. So in 2014, India was roughly 30% ahead of Bangladesh in per capita GDP terms. We were at roughly about $1,550 per person per year. They were at $1,100. Today they have gone ahead. They are at 2,800, we are at 2,600. And they are expected to remain in front of us. We can't even compete with Bangladesh. We think we are going to beat China and the US. That is not going to happen. So if we are not in that bracket of 75,000, 50,000, 40,000, where are we? Our bracket is this. Bangladesh, 2,800. India, 2,300 last year. So we are $500 behind Bangladesh now. Pakistan is at $1,600. Sub-Saharan Africa is $1,700, not very far from where we are. Lanka is at 3,300. This is who we are in. Hindi, there's a word called Aukat, which comes from, the root word is Waqt, time. We should not pretend that to be something we are not, and that we are going to become something that we are not. If we talk about the economy, we have to accept the fact that India has the lowest labor force participation rates in the world. That the United States has 61% of people over 15 are either working or looking for work. In Japan, in China and Vietnam, it's over 70%. It's higher in Pakistan than it is in India. In India, it's 40%. It's not because our young don't want to work. It's that there is no real job for them to be able to spend and invest time and energy in, even in cities where it tends to be gig working and doing the sort of a delivery work that most of our so-called unicorns based, from Dunzo to Blinkit to Swiggy. What are all these? These are just courier companies. People don't want to spend 20 years I wouldn't want to spend 20 years of my life doing a job that would be at a dead end. Government data says that unemployment in India doubled for the first time in 2019. This survey was first attacked by the Niti Aayog. The government attacked its own survey. And then after the 2019 results came out, that survey was released without any change. For the first time in India's history, jobs in manufacturing have gone down and jobs in agriculture have gone up for the first time. More people are working in the farm. Economists, including Santosh Mehrotra, believe that this is a proxy for unemployment, that when the surveyor comes to the house and asks, what are you doing? They don't want to say, I don't work. So they say, oh, I work in the field. They're not working on the field because you don't need more people now than you did 5 or 10 years ago in the field because productivity has gone up in the natural sense, mechanization has gone up. The BJP wanted to shut down Manrega. It is 4 times the size that it was in 2014. And the reason for that is this lack of jobs. Mr. Modi wanted to take manufacturing after, when Make in India was launched, the goal was that manufacturing share of GDP would go from 16% to 25% in 2020. It's gone to 13%. It's actually fallen. This is government data, but it's not spoken about. We don't know how it is that we bring manufacturing to the country. And to be honest, to be fair to the government, there are no 500 million jobs anywhere in the world waiting to be shifted to India. We are not in that phase of the world's economy when that can happen anymore. a couple of more data points on this. The RBI runs a survey in 19 cities. Every 2 months, in 19 cities, the RBI asks people 2 questions in the main. Are you better off than you were 1 year ago, economically? Except for one period in the last 7 years, which is April 2019, every single survey has returned more people saying, no, I was not better off last year. I was better off last year than I was today. For 7 years. Once again, data that comes out of the state, but is not debated. Of course, we know that there are 80 crore Indians, 60% of the population, likely more because we haven't done a census, likely should be more, since 2011, who have to be given 5 kilos, who need and should be given 5 kilos of free grain every month. I looked at some global indices, including ones that were controlled by conservative bodies, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, Davos, the Cato Institute, the Lowy Institute, the Economist, the Failed States Index. On 42 out of 48, India has fallen since 2014. And the government first tried to push back saying, oh, the data might be faulty, something's going on, something's wrong. But then once the bad news didn't stop coming, the government stopped engaging with it, including the UN, which says that that we have fallen behind the rest of even South Asia when it comes to things like hunger. To begin my conclusion, so under Modi, the political defeat of Muslims that Upadhyay wanted has been achieved. I think that we have defeated, Hindus have defeated Muslims. What should we expect now? The answer is more of the same. There's nothing else. They don't have anything else to offer. And that is dangerous because, not only because of the fact that we are dividing our country deliberately, but also, as I said, as I laid out, there is no real plan to make most of India or large parts of India prosperous and take it out of real poverty. There's no plan. More of the same means that there is no plan, that we will continue doing what we are doing, because if governance is done purely through catchphrase and slogan, real delivery will never be the point on which the government either judges itself or asks to be judged. So we have to offer, and by we I mean civil society, we have to offer another vision of what this country, what this subcontinent ought to be. One that resists majoritarianism in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is the only country in South Asia to not have discriminatory law and to have a minority in its cabinet. It's not India. The Bangladesh constitution opens with Bismillah Rahman Rahim, but it doesn't have any other phrase in it which makes it a religious constitution. India has included a religion in so many laws, including CAA, that we have fallen second to Bangladesh, with Pakistan coming third, because there obviously discrimination is written into law. So we have to offer the subcontinent a vision of what we can and should be, and not continue down this path that's ruinous. We need to be able to there is no running away from it, because this is the way of the world, that if you look at open trade in East Asia, or you look at open borders in Western Europe, this is the modern world. We are choosing deliberately not to engage with it. A world in which East Punjab and West Punjab can trade freely, and East Bengal and West Bengal can travel freely, and families across the LOC can meet freely. We can correct our problems both with minorities and with federalism if we choose to have this vision of a more relaxed South Asia, less nationalistic, less inward focused in its nationalism. And in this vision, again, to go back to something Suresh said, I think we have an ally in our young, that they are less inclined to listen to authority when it comes to, and less gullible, I think, in accepting the kind of arguments we were force-fed when we were their age, because we didn't have access to the kind of information they did. And I think that telling them you cannot eat this, or this is the person you cannot love, or this is where you cannot live, or this is where you cannot work, will be slightly more difficult than it was for us. Finally, I think civil society's greatest strength is its ability and desire to cooperate. That it's easy for us, for me certainly, as somebody who works in civil society, to work with somebody from Pakistan or from Bangladesh. It's natural. It doesn't feel strange. It doesn't feel hostile. Or somebody from Kashmir. And because we choose to cooperate, we don't compete. We have the capacity to build coalitions that can be almost infinitely big in scope and in nature. This is something that we ought to see ourselves doing if the battle is as large as it is, and I think it is very large, and as long as it is going to last, and I think it's going to last very long. Also, I think I shouldn't be seen as speaking for myself, but I think that we are motivated by things that don't involve personal benefit, that we are unified in common goals. And this is the sort of strength that can be utilized and deployed, because I think that the crisis we face concerns more than just one generation. I think it's the biggest thing that we have faced since 1947, and it cannot be resolved by just leaving it to voting or having one party leave power. It's much larger. No society can permanently hate itself and damage itself in the way that you cannot hope to exclude and damage 15% of your body without damaging the body itself. Jews in 1930s Germany, the Weimar Republic, were less than 1% of the population. The Uyghur in China, who are also persecuted, are less than 1% of the population. There are 12 billion people in a nation of 1.4 billion. We have 200 million Muslims, maybe more. You can't persecute them continually without persecuting yourself, without damaging yourself. And in the last century, the arc of humankind has been, in a sense, away from war towards greater integration, whether in East Asia or in Europe. I think India can both be the greatest example of this and the greatest beneficiary of this. And it is our job to convince this generation that a better future is not just possible, but it's also within reach. Thank you very much.